This week on the agenda, the first face-to-face meeting in a year. But what does President Xi and President Biden's summit in San Francisco mean for the rest of the world? China's President Xi Jinping and US President Joe Biden have now held their first face-to-face meeting in a year. After the summit in San Francisco, both sides seem positive, with agreements to open new lines of communication, and Xi insisting China is not going to fight a Cold War or hot war with anyone. But what does the summit really mean for global relations more widely, especially with regard to the EU's Ursula von der Leyen's visit to Beijing in December? With me now is Professor Jia Qingguo from the School of International Studies at Peking University. Thanks for coming on the agenda. Now, how do you think that the candid and in-depth exchange between Xi and Biden altered the trajectory of US-China relations?
Well, I think this summit is very important in the sense that it has, consolidated the progress that has been made in terms of resuming communication and consultation between the two countries at senior levels. And also, it has reached some important consensus on various kinds of issues. So in a way, China-US relationship is stabilized for the time being and has more promise for cooperation in the in the months ahead.
You mentioned that stability. In fact, China's Foreign Affairs Minister Wang Yi said after the meeting that the world needs a stable China-US relationship more than ever. Why exactly do you think now is that time?
Well, because of China's rise, the relationship involves not just one superpower, but also a forthcoming one. So the two countries have a lot of weight in international relations, in influencing world events. So if they can stabilize their relationship, if they can cooperate, then a lot of problems in the world have a chance to get resolved and effectively managed.
He also questioned whether China and the US were partners or rivals. What do you make of that statement?
We are partners in the sense that we share a lot of common interests and stakes in our bilateral relationship. We have a lot of trade, we have a lot of investment in each other's country. We also share a lot of interests in terms of security, and also we share a lot of aspirations as to how to deal with the global challenges, ranging from proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, illegal immigration, and terrorism, and climate change. So we should work together. In that sense, we are partners. Of course, we have a lot of conflicts. We have a lot of differences. We need to manage those differences and make sure that they do not veer us into conflict, especially a military conflict.
And of course, there was lots of discussion about the five pillars approach, including changes in perception and managing disagreements effectively, as you've just mentioned. So which of the pillars do you think needs most work and why?
Well, I think they are all very important. I think, first of all, correct understanding of the nature of the relationship, that's very important. I think a lot of people tend to view one aspect of the relationship at a time, but the relationship has to be viewed as a whole. It involves both the shared stakes and interests, and also conflicts and differences. So, but our shared interests and stakes far outweigh the need to fight and over the differences. So I think this is very important. This is the basis for us to develop our relationship. But of course, other aspects of the pillars are also very important.
Let's talk a little bit more about those disagreements, because President Xi said it's important to both appreciate each other's principles but also red lines and refrain from flip-flopping and being provocative and crossing the lines. What's your take on that?
Well, we have a lot of differences in terms of ideology, in terms of whether to what extent you can interfere in other countries' internal affairs. And also we have different views as to what constitutes freedom of navigation. From the U.S. point of view, as long as it's beyond the territorial waters, then you can have freedom of navigation. You can send your military ships, spy planes very close to your coast, but it's international waters. But from the Chinese perspective, you can have free commercial navigation, but then if you can have safe passage of military ships and aircrafts. But if you conduct military activities and conduct spy missions, then that's not totally free. Somehow you have to. You're not supposed to do that. So we have differences over that too, and also most importantly, the question of Taiwan. To what extent the U.S. has the right to tell us Chinese what to do with Taiwan, especially what are the rights Chinese have over Taiwan. As far as China is concerned, Taiwan is part of our country, even though it's politically separate at the moment. It's still territorially part of China in sovereignty terms. So the U.S. has no right to sell arms to Taiwan, and U.S. has no right to send military personnel to train the Taiwan military forces on the island. So, so somehow, these and many other differences we have, we need to manage those differences to make sure that we do not get into a military conflict over those differences. And of course, on human rights, we have different conceptions as to how to protect human rights, individual rights, vis-a-vis the collective rights. Yeah. So somehow we need to respect each other in terms of their domestic governance on the human rights issue. Yeah. Of course, you have a right to criticize each other, but then such criticism should not be made as a kind of propaganda against the other party. So we need dialogue and exchanges of views, even on that kind of differences.
So there's an acute acknowledgement of the differences, but President Xi was very clear that he wants to build more bridges and pave more roads for people-to-people interactions. But what might that look like in practice?
Well, there are many things to be done, especially at the people-to-people exchanges level. We can make getting a visa easier. We can try to increase the number of flights so as to drive down the cost of travel. And also, we can encourage more people to visit each other, to study, to do business, to visit their relatives, to do sightseeing. So all these kinds of things, the two governments should make efforts to make it easier for and less expensive for this kind of activity to happen.
China's next key meeting with Western powers is likely to be in December. That's a high-level delegation, including EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, is planning to go to Beijing. How might the meeting that we've had in San Francisco affect all of that?
I think it will have a positive impact on exchanges between China and EU. One of the obstacles in the past is the problematic relationship between China and the U.S. The U.S. tend to would ask their allies and partners, to toe the line, to stand on the U.S. side. And now the U.S. China is trying to work with China to stabilize the relationship. So probably opens up more room for EU and US allies and partners to do the same. So, but of course, EU has its own priorities, its own challenges. It wants to deal with China on its own terms. But one problem less probably would help.
Where do you see relations between the three global powers, China, the United States and Europe, sitting by the end of the year?
The previous slide toward deterioration, toward a worse relationship, has been effectively put to a stop for the time being. So there is more room for the three parties to engage with each other and identify, manage their differences, identify areas where their interests overlap or they shared common interests and stakes, and work together on that basis to achieve their goals. For example, cooperation on the climate change, cooperation on other global problems, whether immigration, illegal immigration, or terrorism, or drug smuggling, or money laundering. So there are all kinds of things that the three parties can have shared interests, and they should work together. And by the end of the year, I think they have a better chance than earlier to deal with to engage in such kind of cooperation.
Professor Jie Qingguo, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Still to come here on the agenda, we'll look more closely at China's relationship with the EU as Ursula von der Leyen prepares for her trip to Beijing next month.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Welcome back to the agenda. As we've heard, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will be heading to Beijing in December, along with the President of the European Council, Charles Michel. So what impact might the summit in San Francisco have on that gathering? Joining me now from Brussels are Bernard de Wit, Chair of the Belgian-Chinese Chamber of Commerce, and Hossuk Limakiyama, Director of the European Centre for International Political Economy. Thanks for coming on the agenda, gentlemen. Bernard, I'm going to start with you. I wonder if the agenda for the EU meeting in December is likely to be much different from the issues we've already been hearing discussed this week between President Xi and President Biden.
Well, there will be common issues and different issues. The common issues are two aspects. Some are the conflicting issues common to the EU and the US in dealing with China: the trade deficit, the de-risking, the open access to Chinese market. The positive common issues are the fight for climate change, the pollution, the biodiversity, also the interdependence. People speak of China-America, we could speak of China-Europe interdependence. And the different issues is specific, for instance, to the US is the military issue, the crisis of fentanyl, which is less affecting Europe. And specifically to Europe is the inquiry, for instance, on Chinese electric vehicles, the screening procedure, the famous words, China being partner, competitor, and systemic rival, as mentioned Mr. Breton during his trip in China very recently.
Also, the mood music from San Francisco suggests an improvement in relations between China and the United States. How does that benefit Europe, do you think?
Well, Europe's relationship with China is very often seen as a function of the relationship between United States and China, meaning that you need to have a good relationship between Washington and Beijing in order to also have any kind of progress on the European dossier. It could actually play out in two different ways, because we have to also remember that in many areas, United States and China and Europe forms a rivalry in terms of commercial interests. So, for example, if you look at the question about civil aircrafts, United States improving its position vis-a-vis China could actually lead to some advantages for Boeing, which has been rumored for several weeks now. And that could, of course, have a very detrimental impact on sales of Airbus in China. We have to remember that United States and Europe are actually their worst commercial rivals still.
So that certainly plays into it. So Bernard, let me ask you from an investor point of view, because many analysts are looking at San Francisco as a bit of an inflection point to lure investors back into China. So I wonder if a trade détente between China and the US is good news for Europe.
I think it is good news. I think it is good news because that will allow European companies to go with more confidence to China. I must say that many, especially of the big European companies, have long been in China and are still staying in China and are still investing in China. We saw, for instance, BASF, who made a very big investment very recently. But it can attract new, especially small and medium-sized companies back to China without too much fear of a retaliation from the US, for instance. That is something we can hope.
Hossuk, how linked do you think the EU and the United States are now in terms of the relationship they have with China? I mean, might the EU want to be seen as treading its own path and not just following the lead of the United States?
I would say it depends on what you mean by Europe. I mean, obviously, France and Germany have their own security as well as commercial interests, which are distinctly different from the line that the United States may or may not be advocating. And at the same time, we have a common interest as EU, where Brussels is actually getting clout as its own security and foreign policy voice. And what we have seen in the last few months, perhaps, is that there is a particular close relationship between President Joe Biden and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, where they seem to be at least in very good sync in terms of what they actually want from China and how they see the end game further down the road as China becomes a much stronger power. So I think the best way to answer this question is to say that yes, United States and Europe play along in certain areas, but there are also there are areas where each European member state have their own interest vis-a-vis not just, well, United States, but also against each other.
Hosuk, let me stay with you. I wonder if you think China views Europe as a competitor, and if so, in which industries in particular?
Well, in some of the most advanced sectors with the highest value added, we have started to see head-on competition between Europe and China. I'm thinking in areas like network infrastructure. Huawei has certainly taken significant share of not just European markets, but also third markets away from European dominant players like Nokia and Ericsson. And this has also culminated in a number of politically sensitive conflicts, and including a number of measures that have been taken both China and Europe against each other. But also in areas like in energy infrastructure, electrical grid, we have seen now that China is making forays into notably Southeast Asia and other third markets, where Chinese interests have become really, really strong and actually a viable alternative to European construction engineering companies.
Let's talk a little bit more about technology. Bernard, I want to pick up on something that you mentioned before about the comments that European Commissioner Thierry Breton made on his recent trip to Beijing, making a bit of a jibe at China's tough line on access to its vast telecoms market. And he noted that the European 5G equipment providers' share has fallen to single digits. So what do you expect then in terms of that access to the Chinese market for European companies?
Well, as Commissioner Breton mentioned in a speech he made in Beijing during his last trip, I would say the challenge for Europe is the European authorities want to have a rebalance of the relationship between China and Europe. The fact that there is a very important trade deficit, the de-risking of the economies, the addressing global challenges together. Concerning the telecom sector, there is indeed the Chinese companies have taken the lead, and I must say that is also due to the fact that the investments in research and development by companies like Huawei, for instance, is enormous, and that has brought such companies to be very advanced. But there are also European telecom providers like, for instance, Nokia or Ericsson, who would like to have some part of the market also in China in providing some installations in China. And that is all the questions of the openness of the market, of the public procurement market to be more open. I must say that the declaration of the Chinese authorities relatively recently, especially from the MOFCOM, is positive in that aspect. China mentioned they want to open more their market. I think that is a good sign, and which shows some new opportunities for the European companies in that field.
And Hosuk, where do you see scope for close collaboration with the European Union and that bridge building that President Xi spoke about with Joe Biden? I mean, AI, EVs, critical minerals, where are we going to see those partnerships forming?
Well, before we can talk of any partnership, I think we need to have a reset where we actually acknowledge each other as speaking partners. And the way that the dialogue has been going over sanctions, but also some trade disputes, notably the EV one that you mentioned, but also the number of actions that have been taken against Chinese infrastructure companies like Huawei, we probably are at a position where nobody's really interested in giving up. And we are also nearing European elections, which makes it a very close option at hand to just wait until you have a new parliament in Brussels coming in, and which would allow you to actually do a reset without going back in any of the previous positions that has been taken. But there are some low-hanging fruits that has been discussed over the years, and not least in areas like not so glamorous perhaps, but relatively technical dossiers like food safety standards or intellectual property, where China and Europe have some common problems and could work towards a common interest. So it takes a lot before we actually start to talk about big issues like electrical vehicles or critical raw materials, because there is an inherent interest on both sides to keep on to that leverage as long as they can.
And Bernard, I wonder if you can part into this, because there have been curbs in the United States and Europe of Chinese investment into critical technologies. And I wonder if you think that there's going to be more or less scrutiny now that the United States and China seem to be on steadier footing.
I do not expect much changes in the near future. I think, especially at European level, there have been some measures taken, and I don't see them taking back. For instance, the screening procedures that are affecting all non-EU investments. So that means not only Chinese investments in Europe, but also, for instance, US investments. That will remain. The point will be to see how will be the implementation, because you have to know that screening procedure, for instance, is a measure taken at EU level for all European countries, but each European country has to implement it. And that means that some countries could implement it more stronger than others. So we'll have to see in the 2 following years how will be the implementation at that level. So I do not expect much difference for the moment. The difference will be for them in the atmosphere. The atmosphere, if there is a release of the US-China tensions, the atmosphere will be more open, more smooth for later. But immediately, I do not expect much changes.
And Hosuk, where do you see the relationship between the EU and China settling by the end of this year? And I suppose I want to also know where your expectations are in terms of ties developing into 2024.
Well, I think in the short term, we can't expect much firework, I'm afraid. Just to keep things as they are, agreeing to a ratchet that would basically bind both parties to not to deteriorate the relationship even further. Even that would be a major win at this stage.
And Bernard, the same question to you. What's your take?
I think first, the fact that the summit takes place is something very positive. Dialogue is continuing. Dialogue is bringing some common project. I think one of the challenges will be also, for instance, to have again more cooperation between our universities, European and Chinese universities, because that is also the future. The future generations will be now pushed for further to know each other better. I think that is one of the challenges, and I hope there will be some progress at that level following the end of the COVID crisis and the closing of the borders.
Bernard de With, Hosuk Nakayama, thank you very much.
You can watch every episode of The Agenda in full on CGTN Europe's YouTube channel. And for exclusive extra content from me, my guests and the rest of the team, don't forget to check out The Agenda Show on TikTok.
Coming up on a future agenda. As delegates head to the UAE, is the COP28 Climate Summit our last chance to save the planet? But for now, from me, Juliette Mann, and from all the Agenda team here in London, goodbye.